This entire werewolf debacle only complicated things for me. After being returned back to the manor, and getting back to the work at hand, Eliza beginning to go back into research and development, and Alice and I starting to go back to training, the knowledge that a werewolf might be coming for us only made things more difficult. We had to start saving enough magic to start building defenses around the manor. Magical barriers that would alert us should supernatural beings enter. Traps that triggered if something of a magical nature crossed their path. Alert spells that were permanent and fixed, that would notify us if anything untoward came into the property. We spent a great deal of time looking over our shoulders, wondering if that thing was going to come back. Staying true to her word, Sylvia, after being given directions to the manor, started paying us regular visits. Of course, we had to speak under the pretense that she was a friend of my mother's, from before we entered higher society. Sylvia's appearance wasn't what you would call high status. Beautiful or not, her manner of dress wasn't something that was suited for higher status interactions. But as I was the master of the house now, it was no trouble at all to give her clearance to come and go. And quite frankly, I'd say that her knowledge and experience has been indispensable. Choosing to do business with her was a wise choice, and is reaping great benefits. First and foremost of would be the obvious magical supplies that she was granting us. We did lose some measure during the attack, but Sylvia gladly replaced them, as we were still within the confines of her property when we were attacked. She said she felt it was necessary. She can't have people thinking that when they come to her to do business, the goods she sells them won't leave safely. So she replaced them at no cost. But from that point forward, we would need to start paying. Thankfully, she requested no more magical assistance, asking only monetary sums. It was fairly expensive, but then again, the things that she produces are quite hard to make, especially when you're thinking about quality. It was also somewhat taxing dealing with the timelines. We wanted access to more things, of a different variety, but apparently specific types of products can only be made during specific timelines, meaning once those specific resources were used up, it would be some time before they could be replaced, which means Eliza had to be very careful in the way she chose to use whatever products fell into those categories. The more powerful the product, the chances are the longer the timeline it took to create it. But Sylvia was of course upfront on all the timelines that would be required, so it wasn't much trouble. Honestly, I don't understand why Alan Wallengard had such a problem with her. Yes, the timelines are inconvenient, but at no point did she ever try to lie. She simply told us that the timeline that we wanted was simply not possible. She seemed to be quite straightforward about it, though her personality leaves something to be desired. As far as a business contact goes, she's quite superb, and I like the way she operates. I also managed to talk her into teaching me a little bit more about supernatural entities, things other than casters, that I might need to worry about. Things that more and more I wish that I had happened to include within the index when I initially made the deal with the man in the pinstripe suit. And there was a world of information that simply wasn't included. To start things off, basically, every supernatural thing I've ever heard of is basically real. It's not just magic that's real, it's all the other supernatural things that go with it. Ghosts, ghouls, goblins, werewolves, and vampires. even other planar entities like fairies, gnomes, leprechauns, things that come from the Fey realm, the bestial realm, and countless other places. They were all real, and had specific types of standards for interactions. For instance, beings from the Fey realm were known to be, well, mischievous by their very nature. They would operate much like businessmen, cutting deals in exchange for things that they wanted. However, unlike a practical businessman, they operated more like swindlers. They would of course cut the deal with you and give you what you asked for. However, they would usually use things like technicalities, specific wordplay, and terms of the agreement in order to create loopholes, gaps in the contracts and agreements that would allow them to basically abuse it, break the rules, do things that were contradictory to the benefit of the person that they were making the agreement with. Basically, if they could pull a fast one on you, they absolutely would. Werewolves and vampires, on the other hand, were native to this realm. Though there are countless questions about the nature of their powers, most of those things are kept secretively within their own culture, and not shared with casters. They called themselves the monster races. Along with others, they kept a tight grasp on knowledge of their abilities and their origins. So basically, what most people know about them is only really what they're willing to share. But much is known about their basic societal structures. Most specifically, the things that I was worried about were in the werewolf category. I learned that they had their own hierarchy, and some details about the structure of that hierarchy, which might prove useful if I have to end up dealing with them. Sylvia also started running little tests of her own, as part of creating magical enhancement items for us, which I also had to pay a fair price for. But anything that increases our magical capabilities is worth the investment. Eliza was of course able to cover her own, as well as Alice, but even simply paying for mine was fairly pricey, and the process for creating one seemed to be incredibly complex, starting with very strange tests, the first of which was quite unusual. Basically, Sylvia brought a very large metal pot of sorts, like a cauldron maybe, with strange symbols etched into it. Along with that were countless tiny little vials, each with small amounts of different elements that had been treated in specific ways. The pot itself would be filled with water, and then all the different vials would be placed into the pot. They of course had enough air inside of them in order to float, without any issue. Then you would grab the pot by both handles, and Sylvia would instruct you to pour magical energy into it. After which, very strange things would start to happen. The vials filled with different materials would move and act, seemingly of their own accord. Some would start to sink to the bottom as if they were suddenly weighed down. Others would begin to circle the pot, as if there was some kind of churning or spinning in the water, even though there wasn't. Others did nothing at all, staying in place. And a myriad of other different types of activities, the range of which was extraordinarily wide. There were in fact so many different substances in this test that a single round couldn't test them all. We ended up having to test for several days, countless hundreds of different vials with different reactions to the magic that I put into the pot. Sylvia keeping a large list and recording all the reactions that the bottles had, based on some deductive reasoning that was very base, and a little bit of explanation from Sylvia, it was apparent what was going on was that she was trying to find the appropriate combinations of materials, and that those materials would react to my magical energy in a very specific way. Much like casting a magic spell itself, she needed to create a proper process, a system of interactions that would cause the desired effect when my magic was used. Sylvia was most definitely not lying when she said that what she did was no simple feat. It was incredibly complicated, and I had a tough time grasping even the most basic elements of it. It was undoubtedly a science unto itself. And then, even after that process was over, there needed to be other tests. She would begin testing metals, woods, stones, also treated with magic in a number of ways, to see how my power would interact with them. Once again, the results were widely varied. Some types of wood would burst into flames when my magic was passed through them. Others seemed to get damp, some even dripping water, despite the fact that they were dry when I picked them up. Some pieces of stone would crack and break apart. Others would float as if they were being held aloft on strings that weren't actually there. And once again, a wide variety of interactions depending on what I was putting my magic into. But lo and behold, we finally came to the last measure of testing, which Sylvia referred to as the form test. Basically, she needed to find a form to cast the weapon into, so to speak. The magical enhancement product would work best if it was something that fit me. And like all the other tests, there were countless options for what exactly might work. It could basically be anything. The form of one's magical enhancement product was once again a reflection of the individual themselves. She began trying everything from articles of clothing, pieces of weaponry, rings, gloves, wands, staffs, all to see how my magical powers interacted with them. Because apparently the form of your enhancement product has its own effect, and if the form doesn't fit the person, then you can receive what you might call negative responses. For example, I tried a pair of glasses as an enhancement product, even though I didn't need them. Sylvia suggested it would be a bad idea since I don't wear glasses. It was highly unlikely that that's something that was going to fit my personality, but I wanted to try it anyways. Upon doing so, I found that any spell I attempted to cast simply didn't function properly, sometimes refusing to hit the target, other times changing the spell entirely into something completely different, like drawing cards from a hat and not knowing which one you're going to get. After a long series of testing, Sylvia said that she had found the information that she needed to know, and that soon enough she would have my enhancement product ready. She said something about the length of a quarterstaff would do. Nicely for me. All that was left to do was to do a little bit of tweaking on the form in order to maximize its correlation to me and my personality. She also made it clear that this was an entry-level enhancement object. It wasn't going to be the most powerful thing out there. It was simply a gateway object, something that would allow me to get used to it. It would of course enhance my magical capabilities. However, if I wanted something to be exceptionally powerful, that was something that came at a much higher cost. One that for the moment I neglected, or should I say avoided, as those costs tend to be of a strange and somewhat colorful variety. Simple coin wouldn't cut it. But after several weeks, of testing and several more weeks of waiting, Sylvia finally delivered the finished product.